You described this piece as
Mhm.
conceptually elusive yet filled with visceral sound colors and effects, evokes wailing phantoms and silvery spiders crawling in an icy chamber. Of
Did you get
that.
that from my Instagram?
It's on your website. It's there.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. Welcome to In Conversation. This is the series where we interview the musicians, producers, and artists behind many of the concerts that we produce. My name is Nicholas Arnold. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager with Attila Glatz Concert Productions, and I am thrilled to introduce our guest for you today. She is the winner of the 2018 Shanghai Isaac Stern Violin Competition. With a robust online presence that seeks to invigorate appreciation for the art and science of the violin, her thoughtful musicianship resonates with a global audience in such a way that brings her on stage with leading orchestras around the world. She was a scholarship holder with the Anne-Sophie Mutter Foundation from 2008 to 2018 and has continued to perform with her as part of the Mutter Virtuosi. Please welcome my guest, Nancy Zhou. Nancy, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nicholas.
Listen, I am just so impressed with your career, reading your resume. It's so extensive. I'm first of all so looking forward to the concert in February here in Toronto. But what I always like to do when I'm chatting with musicians, as someone who played piano as a young
Mm.
kid, I was 4 years old. I love to just go back to the beginning in those early days of musical inspiration. So I know that your father is who introduced you to the violin. I'm just wondering, did he just do that apropos of nothing, or did you express interest beforehand? Where did that sort of start?
It's a very good question. I would say it's kind of like apropos to his childhood, growing up as a musician, into a family of actually traditional Chinese instrumentalists. So for some bizarre reason, he chose the more Western instrument of the violin, and study at this Shanghai Conservatory. And then I was born in San Antonio, Texas, and then he landed a job there and introduced me to the violin, and that's how it all started, I would say, and I stuck with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So he introduces you to it. Is he teaching you in those initial days, or did he set you up with
Oh
like
yeah.
oh really?
Yeah, he was my primary instructor throughout my entire childhood, actually up until my first year of college. So yeah,
That's
he was
incredible.
with me through the thick and thin of developing my musical studies. Yeah, I
Was he?
never never had another teacher. So,
That's amazing. I was
yeah.
because I was going to ask about that, but that's kind of really a beautiful thing, actually. Like a nice connection that you share. Was he a
It.
strict teacher, or was it like
Oh yeah.
yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, but I think with every, with any beautiful thing, I guess there's always that underbelly of like, friction and torment. There was a lot of struggle throughout, especially during my more rebellious teenage years. Um, it's never very easy to have a parent as your teacher, I would say, especially one who follows you through, your entire childhood and tracks your growth. Yeah.
That's fascinating because I've talked with a lot of musicians, and I was kind of the same way. I was 15 years old when I quit piano lessons. I was doing them from
Mm.
age 4 to 15, and just you bringing up the teenage rebellious years, that tends to be that point where I think people either stick with it or they don't.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
have like that crossroads where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to quit as a teenager?
Um, I would say, my early years were punctuated by those little moments of saying, just screw this. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too much work. It's too much emotional torment, especially having a strict father, who means, of course, very well for you. But I think music, naturally, it just organically kind of became a source of solace and comfort for me. So it was just something that I wouldn't be able to give up, even if I didn't, like the violin. It was just music was so entrenched, and I sooner or later, luckily enough for me, quite early on, I realized the power of it, to console and to resonate emotionally with it. So I stuck
That
with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to talk a little bit about that and just your work in general and what you've done.
Mm.
Um, but was there sort of an epiphany? I guess you've kind of described it, but was there anything that you can kind of pinpoint where you're like, I want to do this professionally and I want to go
Yeah.
through the struggles of what that means? I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, there was a very pronounced inflection point. I think it happened when I was 13, and that was the year 2008, I believe, or 2006. Can't do my math. I was born in 92. But 2006, where I participated in my first international competition. So this was in Poznan, Poland. Actually, funnily enough, one of the members of the Virtuosi, Agata Shevska, she was the winner of that competition. So we went to that same competition, and she didn't know me, but I of course knew her because she won. So it was during that time when I entered this first competition and got to see all of these other amazing violinists and colleagues, future colleagues of mine, that inspired me to think more than, more kind of beyond myself in terms of what music making is. It's not just about my own personal growth, but being inspired by other people. And of course, having the privilege to share music on a very esteemed venue, esteemed stage. So I think that was kind of the turning point for me where I said, well, it's more of a community rather than a solitary kind of growth trajectory where you have to bottle up all of your own struggles. And I realized that other people experience the same struggles. I mean, probably not the same, but similar patterns.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. And so when you have this kind of realization, what do you do in terms of like taking that next step to go professional? Are you looking into schools at that point? Are you looking into, I
oh
mean,
yeah,
is your father still teaching you at this point? So,
yeah.
but yeah, like how do you go, okay, I want to take it from here to here and what are the next steps?
Yeah, it was not very obvious to me, but I do remember after returning from Poland back home, I think I started looking more into the person behind the music, so the composers, kind of exploring, what their life was like. So digging deeper into music history provided that perspective. So I no longer treat it as something abstract because at that point, I think before that, it was just a bunch of pieces, and my father never taught much about music history and the stories of composers, but rather just would assign me pieces, and then it's just too menial and kind of laborious for me. So it was only until that point where I could attach a person behind it, and because I, I think just naturally as a person, I kind of gravitate towards people reading. I love just observing and digging into the history and kind of getting to know more of the personal narratives behind, like, even if it's a deceased composer, right? You just have to put a face behind the name. And it was then I thought, okay, so my job is to actually tell a story. And sometimes that story of a certain composer might resonate very well with me. So I can kind of weave in my personal experiences, because that's usually what it comes down to have a strong interpretation of a piece and to find personal interest in it. There needs to be something that speaks to you. Okay. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up because that was one of my questions is whether or not you do this sort of extensive research
Yeah.
because it makes sense. Actors do like script analysis and like
Mhm.
musicians, it makes sense that you would do like music analysis of the sheet music, including the
Mhm.
history behind it, right?
Yeah.
Did you notice any sort of shift in your playing when you started doing that? Like, as you said, you realized, okay, I'm actually telling a story here. How did that affect
Yeah.
your playing?
Well, I think once you set the compass straight with, for example, storytelling being one of your main motivations when you're studying a piece of music, it teaches you how to empathize more, I would say in general. So when you're approaching a score, a musical score, you're not only looking at the notes and perfecting it in terms of, playing in tune or playing the right notes, but you're taking one step further and you're trying to say, well, what is the message that I believe the composer is trying to convey? Um, and that I part of the statement is so important because that is the opportunity for you to kind of nitpick from your database of personal experiences and try to decipher what is going on, because it is all about emotions at the end of the day, about certain sensations in the body, and I think that's quite universal, right, to have that physical experience. So I think when you're, of course you have to go through ear training, you have to have some kind of music theory understanding, but the notes do convey a certain sensation. I think that's what motivated me after that turning point. Yeah, so
I love it. I want to get into. I want to go in order of your career, but I'm going to bounce around a little bit
mm,
here because I found something great on your website. So in 2021, I think it was, you performed Unsuk Chin's Grand Cadenza with Anne-Sophie Mutter. Uh,
yeah,
was that 2021? Yeah,
yeah.
and
Wait, that
I just
was, oh, sorry, I think that was,
it was in the
gosh,
pandemic.
it's, yeah, it's like, your sense of time gets completely discombobulated. So
It's
I don't
all
remember
one
which
big
year it
long
was.
year. All one big long year,
Yeah. All I
right?
know is that it was in Europe.
Yes.
So, I mean, I wasn't the only one to perform with her. Of course, I had,
Yep.
all of our other colleagues, or at least a handful of them, got the chance to perform with her. But yeah, that was, I think I performed it in Hamburg and Dusseldorf with her.
The reason
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it up, and it
Mhm.
just as a segue from how you just described kind of playing music, is you described this piece as
Mhm.
conceptually elusive yet filled with visceral sound colors and effects. The work
Mhm.
for you evokes screaming, dueling ghouls, wailing phantoms, and silvery spiders crawling in an icy chamber. I love the description of
Did you
that.
get that from my Instagram?
It
I
was on your
don't remember.
website, so it might have been
Oh, it
linked
was,
on the. It
oh,
might
it
have
says,
been
says,
linked on both. Yeah, so it's on your website. It's there.
yeah.
But I love the description of that. There's this almost this writer side of you in that, and I'm just wondering if when you're actually in the
Mm.
moment playing and performing a piece, if those visuals are kind of going through your head and informing you as you're playing. Like, what is that
Yeah.
zone like that you get into?
Um, so I like to see myself, I love tapping into like the wordist part of my identity, I guess. I studied English in college, so there's probably that to be said. So yes, I do like verbalizing. Um, Sometimes because of course Miss Mutter talks about this as well. She often quotes this German philosopher and says, it's when you're at a lack of words that music comes in, right? So, but I think it goes hand in hand. It can work the reverse way, where if you're looking at a piece of music, sometimes just trying to associate keywords helps. At least it helps me personally just embody the music a bit more, because then I start thinking about, okay, how does this keyword make me feel? And I'm very much into kind of sensation, so that it's more of a complete experience where I'm just not playing the notes. And yes, I might be feeling a certain emotion, but I would prefer to put some specificity to that. So sometimes they might not have anything to do with each other. I don't think Un Suk Chin was thinking about screaming ghouls or, spiders when she wrote this. But of course, she's also a very affective composer. She taps into a totally new sound world, that is beyond convention. And you'll hear it, when we play this duo together, because I will be playing it with Miss Mutter in Toronto. That it at first listen, it just sounds like it's just so compelling. It's something that is entirely novel. It's not a typical romantic or classical piece from the standard canon, and it's very affective. And I think Un Suk Chin actually said that she oftentimes takes sound snippets from her dreams and
Uh,
it integrates it into her work, which I find very fascinating. And that explains why she's able to notate so many of these different nuances in gestures, and in sound and like overtones in the instrument that we just don't oftentimes hear. So it's a very subliminal experience, um, when you listen to her music. It's not like explicitly okay, sad or disappointing, like any of these standard emotive words. And that's what I'm interested in. So that's why I like to verbalize and try to be as specific as possible to really pinpoint what exactly it is that I feel when I listen to any of these composers' music that I'm, whose works that I'm going to play.
I'm so glad I asked you about that because now I'm so looking forward to it. And you know what? I'm gonna actually save that and not kind of go into it beforehand. I think especially with what you just described, I'm just gonna
Yeah, yeah.
wait for that
I mean,
moment.
I can preface it by saying even if you did research on this specific work, the Grand Cadenza, um, you go onto the publisher's website and they will just basically explain like the form, that it contains rhapsodic, fantastical fantasy elements. It's very free motion. But I think one key phrase that you can keep in the back of the mind when you're listening to it is that it's a fluid sound sculpture, and those are the three exact words that Lin Chen
I like that.
used. Yeah.
I like that a lot. We're going in a direction that I absolutely love, but let's just tell a little bit more of the story and tell me how you got uh, involved in the Anne-Sophie Mutter Foundation.
Yeah.
So doing the math, 2008, were you 14, 15? 15?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
wow. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Oh gosh, it's I so up until this day, of course, there are different ways of cherishing a relationship, but that's basically it. That, through the many years that I've had the privilege of being close to her, and not in terms of like personally, but as close as it can get with being fellow musicians. She is, I could count her as one of my most inspirational mentors. And I still remember the very first time I met her. I knew of her before when I was a child. She was kind of an iconic staple throughout my childhood. I would listen to recordings of her and recordings of Heifetz, and I would tell my dad. I think at that time I was more inspired, to pursue a career as a violinist. This was after I went to this competition. But at that point, after the turning point, I was like, I just want to be them both, like merged together. So that was kind of my guiding light. Of course, I have a voice of my own now, but I think it's always safe to say that you must have like some inspiration, um, compass to gravitate towards before you find your own individual voice. So she was that. She was always present in my childhood, and then the first time I met her was in Kansas City. She was presenting a recital with Lambert Orchis, her longtime collaborator, and she told me to come and play for her because I had actually applied for the foundation. So I remember it was a very extensive um, process because I sent in the application, I sent in a recording of myself playing the violin, and then at that point, I also knew how to play viola and I was learning cello as well. And I think she was quite impressed with that part, not so much about my violin playing
Okay.
skills, I guess, at that point. And then she was like, "Can you please send some more recordings of you playing the viola and
Mm.
cello?" So I think that's what really drew her attention towards me. Um, Personally. So then she invited me to do an in-person audition. I remember I had played some sonatas by Beethoven. I think it was the Kreutzer and some Brahms sonatas as well, which she had stipulated. And then afterwards, her first piece of advice, which I find really telling of her character, is like, Nancy, you need to get a boyfriend.
Ah,
Yeah, which I mean, at that point, I was like this reserved, shy Asian girl, with a strict father. So I was like, that just completely caught me off guard, but I felt so liberated by it, oddly enough. And then my dad was, of course, with me. You know, he called me. I don't think he really approved, but I just thought, wow, what a woman. You know, she's such a tour de force just in
what,
that first comment.
yeah. So
Um,
what do you think that like first comment even means in terms of like
yeah,
your career?
I think based on how just the many times I've interacted with her or just observed her from the side, I feel like she's so down to earth and she's so in tune with enjoying life, and not just being straitjacketed by, perfecting your skills and trying to achieve, uh, and follow your ambitions, which are all incredibly important to have the discipline. But I think she was also, very much into just enjoying the little details of life. So I think what she meant was to get a life.
Yeah.
Get a life and experience because that's the only way you can grow. Because usually life gives you many risks that you have to take, and you'll keel over from them sometimes, and but then you'll always grow from that. So I think she was probably giving more advice, towards my character because usually a person's character can permeate, your identity as a musician, your musical voice.
It's interesting because I think a lot of artists kind of do put bury themselves in a cave a little bit, and
Yeah.
but so much about our life, the hardships that we
Hmm.
want to avoid, actually informs how we paint, play, write,
Right. Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, right? And when you cocoon yourself, you're actually kind of I think in a way restricting your talent. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that you picked up on that energy with you right
Yeah.
off the bat, right?
I
um,
mean, I know for a fact because now that I look back at photos of me when I was 13 or 12, I was like, just a very prim and proper little Asian girl, straight black hair, and just not really in tune with the body. And I think but that's so understandable. I think when you're sheltered,
yeah,
and of course I love, my father dearly, but he had his problems with, just being overly protective
yeah.
and all of that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
always with the best, interests at heart, right? But,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
When you're so, especially because you admire Anne-Sophie,
Mhm.
prior to this, was there, like, ever a little bit, even maybe still, a bit of, like, imposter syndrome in that sense of, like, you're playing the same
Mm.
instrument as her,
Mm.
does your mind at any time go and compare yourself to this icon and I'll never be as good or this
Yeah.
kind of stuff? What
Um, I think, now that I look back at it, I'm 30 now. So, of course, if you're asking the present me, I don't think I I don't think that's healthy, honestly speaking. I think, of course, you have to practice the humility and appreciate, how much work she has done. And of course, personally, I venerate her so much and I still respect her a lot. But I think at this point, there's no ounce of intimidation, I would say. I feel I'm very respectful of her, and of course, she can come off as just a very strong person of her own, just based on the many achievements that she has had, throughout her lifetime. And she will forever remain an icon for me. But I think at this point, it's more of a kind of colleague
Yeah,
standing level, and I think that's really important for anyone who kind of falls prey into this, just not even cult of personality because that's far from what I think she wants, but it's just, venerating someone. And because if you establish that distance, it's very hard to pierce through and understand her as a person, which I'm more interested in doing. And Yeah, I think it's kind of
yeah,
just, I hope she sees me as a friend. I don't know. Of course, I still respect her dearly because of her seniority, and that's just kind of ingrained in my culture as an Asian, but I think she deserves all the admiration and respect that should be duly owed to her. But I think at this point it's just kind of like just a friend, and I think friends can inspire you, and yeah, and I think eventually, ultimately, you still have to find your own voice. I've had periods where, just as I was telling you about how I wanted to kind of merge Miss Mutter and Heifetz's voice together and then let it become mine, but I realized very soon enough that it just doesn't work like that. You have to have your own personal experiences with life, and then eventually it will just come to you somehow. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
can't
think
pursue it. Yeah,
you nailed it in that like that kind of awareness comes with maturity. Like I'm glad you mentioned like
yeah,
just because it actually does come as we cross our 30s,
yeah.
right?
Oh,
We
I
spend
just
it.
turned 30,
Oh,
just a
hey,
few
happy
days ago.
birthday!
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like that shift I think happens, and we spend so much of our 20s and especially our teens with that sort of veneration for people and
Yeah. Yeah.
looking up to, which makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
who you're inspired by
Yeah.
and who you ultimately learn from. So
Yeah.
and it's almost like this is that exciting part where now you can start to discover
Yeah.
who you are and
Yeah.
what and all that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, barring all of that, when you're actually on stage performing with her, of course, she has such a commanding presence. I think it's very easy to feel like intimidated, but I think that's just what she doesn't want. That's precisely what she doesn't want. Now, that being said, it's not like you can't compete with her, because I just don't think that that should be even in the discussion. Like, part of the atmosphere. I think it's just to treat her as a partner and to listen to her sensitively, because that's exactly what she does for us. In relation to us when she's playing with us, especially in a duo. And I had this experience personally when I played the Unsichtchen with her. I think it's one of those pieces where it can't be that a voice is shadowed by another, because then that is just so far from the essence of the work itself. The work itself is a lot about like the different modes of interaction, human interaction. Like we engage in dialogue with each other, in conversation. We have conflicts with each other. Sometimes we fuse, um, especially in group dynamics, right? So it kind of explores those different modes. And I think in order to do that, you have to be comfortable with someone like Ms. Mutter in order to really just authentically convey the essence of the work. So I think even for even if you're intimidated, you kind of have to put that aside and say, like, let's just do this for the sake of you know giving the best performance of the work. And then if your mind is set to that, then it's very hard to start thinking about, oh, okay, if she plays better than me, or what's going to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, it just doesn't work like that. Yeah.
We could talk a whole half hour about what she's sort of mentored you on and taught you
Hmm.
over the years, but tell me what you've kind of picked up just through osmosis of
Mm,
observing her on stage. Like, what is some stuff where you're like, I'm taking that with me for the rest of my life?
yeah, her palpable fearlessness. I would say she's scared of nothing, because she is so fixated on conveying what she believes to be essential. Um, her courage, I think, her grit and integrity. I think integrity is probably the key word here. That she has such a strong resolve, um, and she's a visionary in terms of she knows exactly what she wants in a piece of music and how to convey it. So I would say that yeah, that performative courage is something so essential for a musician, because it's only until you reach that level can you convince the audience of what the message of the work is about. And I think even though she has a strong voice, obviously when you just listen to her without seeing, you can tell automatically, oh, that's Anne-Sophie Mutter, right? But I don't think she really thinks about that. I think she just has such a strong vision for all of these pieces that, at the end, it just sounds like that's the way it should be played. And I think with all of these great musicians, there's that level of passion and unadulterated passion and humility, because it takes humility to kind of put your ego aside and say, well, I just really believe this is the way a piece should be played. And you can sense that in the best musicians. And I think that's just something that I also strive for. Yeah.
Beautiful. We're running out of time here, but I did want to talk a little bit about
wow, time really went by quickly.
I know. I know. And the problem is I could keep going. And
yeah. Same here.
Right? It just means we'll have to do this again sometime, Nancy. That's all it means. I wanted to talk a little bit because you've taught master classes, and especially during the pandemic, you now do online courses with people all across the globe. What do you enjoy now as a 30-year-old about passing on information and teaching and taking kind of what you've learned and passing it on?
Yeah, I think by proxy, I developed this passion for teaching through my dad, just, throughout childhood, because he had a studio of around 60 students, believe it or not, private studio of 60 violin students. I think at one point it even reached like maximum of 70, so it was really crazy. So I grew up with teaching just completely permeating my surroundings. So I think I developed a passion for it, even actually before COVID, because I would visit, with colleagues of mine. If they spearhead a festival, they would invite me to do master classes. And I think it's a great way for me to learn how to articulate better about what it is that I find valuable, and, certain directions to take when you're learning the violin. And to also, of course, just for the obvious reasons, to track someone's development on the instrument is a beautiful experience. And I think that's the essence of music as well, to share and to give, and to take it, because you also learn from students, right? Because it's not just about, again, just the violin itself, but actually getting to know the person, the character growth. So that's just something that I've always found fascinating. Again, it goes back to why I like to people read and observe, human behavior. And I think that's just something so incredibly, I just feel privileged that as a human you can do that, and to be involved in the growth of someone.
I love it. I love it. If there's one little piece of advice you could give to someone who's looking to follow like a professional,
to find that right balance of being practical and dreaming. It's because dreaming and pursuing your ambitions. Because I think in this industry, at the end, everyone will excel in what they want if they are at peace with themselves. First of all, you have to get to know yourself. You have to be very comfortable with your body, so that you don't get sidetracked by all the toxicity, because with each industry, there's always some kind of toxic work environment. There's a lot of competition in the music industry. And it's very easy to get swept away by that, and then to lose that sense of self-awareness, and to cultivate that sense of self from an empathetic standpoint. Because I feel like if you empathize with people, if you learn how to empathize, you're generally more kind to yourself. So be kind to others, be kind to yourself. I think there's always a way to be paid for yourself. Yeah.
Best way to sum up this interview. Absolutely. Nancy, thank you so much for this. Folks, you can catch Nancy with Anne-Sophie Mutter and the Mutter Virtuosi on February 7th at Roy Thomson Hall. Tickets are available at roythomsonhall.com. Nancy, thank you so much. This was an amazing interview.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Can I call you Nick?
You can call me Nick. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.